Well, here we are. It's time for the Life Cast. I couldn't be more excited to bring you this one. This is a 10-part series that I've been focused on in my brain since I started this thing, which was, we did coffee, we did music, and we did travel. And all the while, everyone in those pods had a story to tell. And it was their life and it was their life story. And I thought, I want to end it on a life note as far as having some guests on that might be, might have changed the world or might have done some different things in life than we're used to talking to, The great thing about podcasting is that almost every guest that you bring to the table has a unique story to tell. So, whether it was Frank from Slash's band talking about going through being on tour and having to go through all this kind of amazing new world of touring around the world with one of the biggest rock stars in the world with Slash, and then obviously finding out that your wife has been diagnosed with cancer on the way in and how you're going to deal with that, to Tim Wendelboe, who's one of the greatest coffee roasters in the world, coming on and talking about sustainability and why it's important to pay farmers and pay people properly, to set the proper price and make sure everyone's being taken care of. And that was an amazing story to tell. To Mercedes co-hosting travel with me and having chats with Sarah Ayers, who, whose husband got thrown into the mix and beat the Toronto Maple Leafs as an emergency backup goalie. And then how her life got spun upside down after that. Or Addie Bell, who talks about, luxury travel around the world. So there was all these different ways that we went in the first, 3 modules. And here we are at Life. And in Life, I wanted to focus on some very specific stories that were like close to me. These categories I built out for the podcast were very specific as to what I was looking to do and what I feel like I'm most versed in, at this point in my life. And so there's just some specific stories and some specific people that I wanted to speak to in the life section to touch on their life. I just wanted to know about them personally, a little bit more, just things like that. So I just thought, let's build out this series called Life, and who better to kick it off with than Bill Viggers. So Bill, Marathon of Hope, Terry Fox, PR, trying to build this, story, jumping into the mix and, from the Canadian Cancer Society and basically being assigned this kid and having to go and tell the story and get it told in all the different towns that they went into. And it explodes and it turns into this huge, huge juggernaut, which it should have much earlier, mind you. But, just by the time I got to Ontario, it just exploded. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the brand new book, Forever Terry, which is an incredible book. We're going to talk about what happened to Bill after that. He went into film and also did some more PR work. And how do you come out of a scenario like this where you are with this a massive Canadian icon, one of the most inspirational people in the world of all time, let alone Canadian. And then how do you go into something normal from that? How do you go into a new job? And so Bill has been a huge, huge proponent of this foundation. And it's the 40th anniversary of the Terry Fox Run, the Terry Fox Marathon of Hope. And the Terry Fox Run is on September the 20th this year, mostly virtual. And there's a lot of ways that people are going to be able to get involved. So here we are, September the 16th, 2020, and it's, a few days before the run, and Bill's going to talk all about that and talk about his life and what it's been like up to this point and beyond. So I couldn't be more excited to share this story with you, and I hope that you will like it. You'll share it. You'll get it out to as many people as possible. I know we hear in these pods all the time, remember to like and share, and remember to share it with your friends and do this and do that. Well, this story for people around the world, not just Canadian, is one of the most inspirational stories you're ever going to hear. And then, from there, let's get it out. Let's tell this story. Let Bill tell the story of Terry Fox, and let Bill tell the story in his words, and you guys share it and get it out there, and let's really make this a thing. So a great way to kick off the Lifecast. I couldn't be more excited. Brought to you by a brand new sponsor, Partake non-alcoholic beer. People are like, what? Non-alcoholic beer? What? Well, listen, there's people that don't drink. There's people that have, Crohn's disease. There's people that have gluten allergies. There's all these different things that are going on in the world right now. And there's not a lot of options out there for people that don't want to drink or are trying to take it easy or however it's going to go. I came across Partake, a great Canadian story, and they've got an amazing product. They offer all sorts of product, IPA. They got a pale, they got a stout, they got a blonde, they got a red. They're all really, really great. My personal favorite right now is the pale, but hey, Bill and I had a couple on the beach. We were out in the ocean. The tide was out. We were about half a kilometer to a kilometer out. And while the tide was out, you can hear seagulls in the background. You can hear people running around. It was a great way to sit around and talk about Terry and pay tribute to him. And we had a couple partakes with us, and it was a great chat. So thanks to Partake for jumping on board. They are going to give a listener a prize pack at the end of the Life series. So definitely tune in, share, and do all that stuff, and more details to come on that. drinkpartake.ca is where you can find all the information, as well as on brentonontour.com and all the different places that you need to find me, Instagram, all that kind of stuff. But first, it is time, friends, to launch the Lifecast. This is the life of Bill Viggers. Here we go.
He's introduced you to great coffee.
Congratulations! World's best cup of coffee.
Great music.
Good win in a wrestling match. Lemmy or God?
Lemmy.
God. Wrong, Dick. Trick question. Lemmy is God.
Great travel.
That's the dream. It's not the destination. It's the journey.
All things to enrich your life.
If you're good at what you do, people will recognize that.
Now, he's ready to tackle life itself.
Whoop-de-doo. What does it all mean?
With some great guests with even better life stories. Yes, even better than how he almost failed grades 2, 4, and 7.
Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
You're listening to the Brenton on Tour Lifecast. Here's BD.
Welcome, everybody, to a very special edition of the Brenton on Tour Lifecast. I am joined today in the middle of the ocean. My good buddy, Bill Viggers. How are you, sir?
I am swell. Glad to be on the sands of White Rock, British Columbia.
Now, we're doing, for the listeners that are not going to be able to see what we're all about right now, but we are, the tide is out, or it's going out right now. We are in the middle of White Rock Beach. I guess it's East Beach.
Called East Beach,
East Beach in White Rock, British Columbia. When I called you about coming on the podcast, I was like, what should we do, or where do you want to do it? We thought we have a favorite pizza joint down in Burnaby called Stan's, and we thought we would do, something like that. And Bill was quick to point out that he lives on the beach and said, why don't we, when the tide's out, we go into the middle of the ocean. So we are about, I would say, a half a kilometer out into the fine beaches area of White Rock, and we are about to podcast about one of the greatest Canadian icons, I guess number 2 on the list, or number 2 on the list of all time, I guess, when a few years ago, but number 1 to me as far as important Canadians in the world, Mr. Terry Fox. So this is an important conversation because we're coming up to the Terry Fox run, obviously Terry Fox Day, everything that's kind of happened around Terry's Marathon of Hope has gone global, and my guest this week, Bill, played an integral role in that, and I thought it was extremely important to get you on to talk about your journey, your time with Terry. There's a brand new book out called Forever Terry that is a really great read, and so there's just lots to touch on. So I really appreciate you coming to the beach on a beautiful sunny day.
I'm glad to talk about Terry, and yeah, you're right, this year is a challenge. It's the 40th anniversary, and the runs had to go viral now, and we're trying to get people to just step out their front door and go for a walk instead of the big runs that we have every year. So we're really counting on people to step up for Terry this year too.
That's great. I think you're going to see a very unique style of Terry Fox run this year. In fact, because everyone's going so viral and everyone is out doing it so much and finding new ways to get creative, that's bands, people, artists, that I think in this particular case you're going to find schools, you're going to find people very excited to find a way to get involved and get involved any way they can and very creatively.
I hope so. I really do.
Yeah. So, Bill, for our listeners, can you let's kind of take it back to the beginning for a minute about how this came about with Terry for you, because you've got a storied history. So there's movies, there's all this other stuff that we'll get to, but the core of this whole thing came together how for you?
Well, I had just moved to Toronto from small town Ontario to take a job with the Canadian Cancer Society as the Director of Fundraising and PR for the Ontario Division. And I had only been there about 3 months. I really actually at the time didn't even know what my real job was. And my boss came along and said, there's a kid with one leg going to run across cancer to raise money for cancer research. Do you want to go see what you can do for him? And that's basically how it started. Terry had already been on the road for about 2 weeks out of St. John's with him and his buddy Doug driving. It was just the two of them living in the van. And I watched them from afar for quite a while until they hit the mainland Sheet Harbor, Nova Scotia, which is where I very first spoke to him on the phone. You got to remember, back in those days, there was no cell phones.
Right.
It was a payphone he called me from.
When they assigned it to you, or when they asked you if you're interested in that side of it, does Terry have to approve you? Or
No.
is it just something like, hey, I've been assigned to you?
Yeah,
and
no,
we're gonna do this?
every province was supposed to have somebody to take care of them. Some of the provinces were more successful than others. St. John, or Newfoundland, for instance, was very good, but it's very sparsely populated. And when he got to Port aux Basques, just before he was going to leave the island, I think it was a population of 10,000, and they raised $10,000 for Terry. And that's where he initially got his idea for $1 from every Canadian. So as it was progressing and things weren't happening, I'm sitting back in Toronto and I'm reading the very small clips in the newspaper. They're in the section 3 on page 6 type of thing. And over time, it started moving closer and closer to the to media. But the first time I spoke to him, he's in a payphone, and I said, when you come to Ontario, and I knew things were not working out there. The receptions were hit and miss, mostly miss.
Right.
People just didn't know about him. It wasn't they didn't care, they just didn't know about him. And so I spoke to him on the phone the first time I talked to him, and I said, when you come to Ontario, what do you want to do? And nonchalantly he says, well, I want to meet Bobby Orr, and I want to meet Daryl Sittler, and I want to go to a Blue Jays game, and I want to go to the CN Tower, and I want to meet Pierre Trudeau. And again, I've just moved from small town Ontario.
4 or 5 huge things.
I'm sleeping on my cousin's couch at the time in downtown Toronto. And I said, well, call me back tomorrow, same time, which was around 5 o'clock. And I came from, the worst anybody can do is say no. So I got on the phone with my assistant, a lady by the name of Deborah Kirk, and we started out contacting him. When he called the next day, I was able to say, okay, Sittler's on, the Blue Jays are on, the CN Tower is on, Orr is going to be in Europe, but he'll find us somewhere along the run, and I can't find Pierre. Pierre at the time was in Europe, and we eventually did meet with him, but Terry was sort of like, really? And I went, yeah, okay, yeah, that's then. So that's Sheet Harbor, Nova Scotia, and then I follow him from afar. And then we decided, the Cancer Society at that time was really run by volunteers. Right. Although I had an executive director, my real boss was a senior insurance executive out of London, a guy by the name of Ron Potter. And so they sent me down to New Brunswick to spend a couple of days with Terry to see what he was like. and that was the first time I spent any time with him in person, and I arrived in Edmundston, New Brunswick, at about 3 o'clock in the morning.
When he does that East run, and it's minorly maybe deflating, like no one knows about him yet, then it, he gets to Ottawa and he has all these kind of requests. He wants to meet all these people. Are you getting pushback at that point, or by the time you started asking those questions, people were aware of what was going on? But like anything else, were people like, well, let's see how he does in Montreal? Like, it's kind of like this weird popularity contest where it's like, okay, well, everyone's on the Terry train, so we're all going to get on it. Or was there a lot of pushback, or was it a struggle?
Within the Cancer Society itself, there was pushback. Quebec, the eastern provinces did the best they could.
Yeah.
Nova Scotia, a gentleman traveled with him and was able to drum up some success. The executive director for Quebec division himself, and it is not the fault of the people, and I'm sure he did not know what it was going to become, but he made the decision not to get involved with the Quebec division because Terry didn't speak English. And
or French, yeah.
Or French, rather.
Yeah.
And that was just one man's decision, not knowing anything. That being said, so Terry's now been on the road for 2 months, and even Ontario division, not all areas, it was broken up into 7 areas. They were called district. Each one had a district director. So initially, Toronto area and Hamilton did not want to participate, and their reason being was our volunteers are spent. We've used them all up in April, and we don't have the manpower to do that. Of course, I've already been down to meet Terry. I see what the routine is, and I'm telling them, we don't need your volunteers. We don't need anybody. Then after that conversation and me visiting him in New Brunswick and getting to know him and realizing that first morning in my mind, there was absolutely no way that this kid was not going to do it. Right from the very beginning, from the very first day I met him, that very first morning, first off, I knew he was going to do it. I listened to him talk those first couple of days. I heard him speak to people. He spoke from the heart. There was no different sides to Terry Fox. What you see is what you got. No speech writers, no PR guys. I could suggest things to him. If it made sense to him, we would do them. If it didn't, you did not try and talk him into it. Meanwhile, in Ontario, I spent about 3 weeks driving back and forth, which answers your question a little bit, to all those little towns between Toronto and Ottawa, and Caladar and Marmora and Peterborough was probably the biggest ones. And I would drive into a little town of maybe 300 people, an intersection, and I'd go to the gas station and I'd say, who organizes things in town? And they go, oh, go see Mabel. She's the head of the the Women's Institute, or go Bob, he's in the Lions Club.
Yeah.
So I had a couple of Polaroid pictures, that's all.
And
I'd go up and I'd knock on their door or drove up to the business and show them the pictures, and I said, there's a kid running across Canada with one leg. He's raising money for cancer research. He still had not been making any news yet to any large extent. And the answer from all of them was, yep, we'll do something if he makes it this far. And I'd go, trust me, he's coming, and he's going to make it this far.
Yeah. It must have been amazing to see it for the first time for you. Like, you hear about him, you go and you meet him, but then to actually witness this marathon every day. It must have been mind-blowing to see.
It was initially, and I'll talk about the very first morning I meet him. I said I arrived at 3 o'clock in the morning. I knew they were going to be at 4, so I just jumped in the back of my rental and threw a cleaning bag. I never wore suits. I hated suits. I still do hate suits. So I climbed in the back, and the lights come on. The guys are coming out. I climb out of the car, and the first words out of Doug, his best friend who drove the van, looked at me, and he went with quite astonishment, "You're the guy from the Cancer Society?" Because everybody else they were dealing with, I was 33, and everybody else they had been dealing with were in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, and all suit wearers. And I'm the guy who's come from Ontario to help.
Right.
And then I watched him that first morning. We drove out in the van into the darkness. Trans-Canada Highway, which I don't know, I think maybe the same way, was simply a 2-lane. It was not a 4-lane divided highway. No traffic except once in a while a transport truck roaring by. And Doug drives out into the darkness, and he's driving back and forth really slowly, and I don't know what he's doing. And what he was looking for was a white shopping bag that they used to, at that time, if we were out in the country, they'd bury the plastic bag in the gravel just so you could see some white of it. And Doug's job was to pull up so that Terry opened the door and stepped on that bag, because he didn't want anybody to ever say that he didn't run every single step of the way.
So the last step he takes at night, he walks into the van, and they say, right here is where I'm starting.
Yep.
The next day.
Yeah.
My foot will go on that bag, and then I will start, and then I will go.
Yes. And if that was not available, he would go over and touch a signpost, a telephone pole,
Sure.
a fire hydrant. And when he got out of the van, that would happen when we were in a build-up area, he would go over and touch that object again. And then that's how he would start his day.
What do you, when you see it though, when you see this, because there's been the movie obviously, which we'll get to, but just how he ran, and like watching the struggle and watching sort of the cadence to his method of running. When you see it, you it's not full on national press yet, but you are here with this kid. And it's like this lonely, barren of highway, and then you guys leave him. So what's going through your head at that moment for you?
We drive off in the darkness. This is the first time. We've let him out. We go up a mile. We stop because he would run mile by mile. That's basically how he was able to do it. He said, I run telephone pole to telephone pole. If I thought of running a marathon every day, I couldn't do it.
Sure.
So we stop. And in the darkness, a transport truck's coming, and I can see him silhouetted in the lights. And it's still dark. And he comes up to the van, and by about the third mile, and the sun's come up, and now I can see his face, that intense look of having to focus on what he was doing, and it sucked the air out of me. And I by about mile 3, I said to his friend Doug, I said, how do you watch this every day? And he said, I don't. And at first I didn't get it. And then I realized for Doug, it was too painful for him to watch him do that. All of this being said, and I want to make it really, really clear, that Terry, when anybody questioned, are you pushing yourself too hard? Are you crazy? What do you think you're doing? His simple, kind answer would be, if I wasn't doing this, I'd be running around a track in British Columbia. So I may as well run across Canada.
It's an amazing way to think about it.
And later that day, in the morning, I saw how he affected people. So now we're in rural New Brunswick, and at the end of a concession road, there's maybe 5, 6 people. The most there ever was 15. And I saw the look on their faces. And I saw how he was affecting these people just by them watching him run. And then that night and the next night, I hear him make his speech, which was basically the same speech in every town. And it was how he lost his leg to cancer, how he was affected by because he was in a sick kids hospital in Vancouver at the time. He was 17. He was too old to go in the adult ward, so he was in the sick kids. So he was watching other children with cancer, and they'd be there one day, and then the next day they would have passed away. And as he said, I could have walked away from that, but I couldn't walk away from that. I had to, when I saw that happening, I had to do something. And it was those kids in the cancer ward that gave him the idea, that initially pushed him and then pushed him along the road. So when I hear him speak from the heart, and you see his speeches in the documentaries, and I go back that it was from the heart, it was a pure message, it was one message, We have to find a cure for cancer. It never changed. And again, I saw how his message to people resonated. And I came back to Ontario realizing that if he comes to Ontario, when we get into a populated area, this thing's going to explode.
Right. I was only 4, I guess, when that happened. I was only 4 when the run was going on. So it was, I grew up in Oshawa, so I know there was a big deal in Oshawa.
Oshawa, yeah.
And that sort of whole thing. I just, given the status that everyone puts on celebrity now, right? And this was way before, obviously, social media, before the net, before anything. The growth of his movement, it just exploded. So I want to touch on that in a minute. The beauty about being in the ocean and being in White Rock is we're also right in the middle of train country. So we're going to take a break.
If you're watching,
yeah,
that's what I was pointing at. There's a train coming.
And I heard it now. So we're going to take a break for the train to pass and grab a little drink here, and we're going to revisit this. And I'm going to introduce Bill to my sponsor, Partake, as well in this break, and we'll be right back. So you've been hearing me talk about Partake. So Partake is the brand new sponsor of the Brenton on Tour Lifecast, the podcast in general for this series. Bill and I have been enjoying one in the middle of the ocean, because you can do that on the water without getting arrested or having the hangover. So a really cool product that I found in my journey over the last 18 months of not drinking and trying this new life on without alcohol. And what a great product. Still tastes like beer, as close as I've tasted yet, and they've got an amazing lineup of products, gluten-free, vegan, if you're into that. There's a whole bunch of going on with it, so check it out, partakebrewing.ca. Okay, Bill, so we kind of left off before the train came and ran through us about the movement and it exploding when you get to Ontario, and it literally becomes national news and all the rest of it. What is your day-to-day like change at that point?
Well, it really changed when we crossed the border into Ontario. We had a very, very good reception in Montreal. Don Sweet, the Alouette football player, ran with Terry, with a number of other people. The radio station in Toronto that was our big supporter from the very beginning, a gentleman by the name of Jeremy Brown, got the Montreal radio station to cover there. Then we come across to Hawkesbury in Ontario to a high school marching band, to a crowd of 300 or 400 people, and it's into Ottawa. Terry does the kickoff at the Saskatchewan-Ottawa game, which, by the way, was not what the original plan was. The original plan is I'd actually had him take a day off in Montreal so that we would arrive in Ottawa for July the 1st. And my idea, although there was nothing firmed up, was to take him to Parliament Hill and try and get him on TV. Well, we're in the lobby of the Four Seasons Hotel, which had come on board as a big-time sponsor, raised thousands of dollars, and actually were part of the annual Terry Fox Run. And somebody came to us and said they want you to kick the football off at the game. So I go to Terry and I went, well, I was going to go to Parliament Hill, but I've got nothing. I can't guarantee anything, or we can go to do this. And he said, I'd rather go to a football game,
right,
based on that. And we're downstairs in the stadium waiting for them, and Terry's practicing. It's a hockey rink underneath the stadium at that time. And he's trying to kick the ball. He's afraid he's going to fall. He's really nervous. And anyway, somebody yells, okay, we're ready for you. And we come up the stairs. We're coming through the opening. And I remember thinking to myself, I hope they know who he is. And as we came out, the announcer goes, ladies and gentlemen, and Terry doesn't even get to the sidelines when the place goes crazy. A standing ovation that goes on and on. And we go to center field, and we're with 3 members of each team, and they're talking to Terry, and they're saying, as athletes, there's no way that we could possibly do what you're doing. You are the greatest. This is coming from professional athletes. And when that happened, I went, it's working. And then we go off down to along Highway 7, heading towards Toronto. And those little towns that I had gone to before, if there was 300 people in town, there were 600 people waiting for him. And by the way, 40 years later, almost every single one of those towns either have a monument or a mural.
If he ran through the town. If he ran through the town or just at a tribute.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like he had run through this town, so we're going to pay tribute to him. Wow. And did you have to go back? Was there like, hey, we missed this town, we got to go back? Or they want you to come back another whatever? Never
went back. Never forward. I'm never
always forward.
Back. Always. And here's the other thing is a couple instances, and it's a long story which I won't get to, but in Sault Ste. In Wawa he had hurt his leg, and we had to take him to a hospital, and it was either Thunder Bay or Sault Ste. Marie, and he said, I won't go forward.
Or I won't go backward.
You have to go backwards. Even at a lunch break.
Yeah.
So he's going to take lunch. You had to find a restaurant that we had passed. You could never go to a restaurant that was up the road.
Gotcha.
Because he wanted to see the road for the first time when he ran it. Every night before he ran, he had this big, thick Reader's Digest book of Canada, Atlas.
Wow.
And he would read about where he was going to run the next day and look at pictures and stuff like that.
How does his, what's his brain like at this point? So, I mean, it was sort of minor at this. He had already put the work in. He'd already ran from, for half the, or a third of the country. But then it blows up. So now his press schedule is doubled, or everything is doubled. Is he getting frustrated, or is it I don't want to be a celebrity, but I do want to be a celebrity? Like that, it kind of would have been crazy at that point, right?
At that particular point, he's just happy that it seems to be building, that his message seems to be getting out. And remember, his message was one message and one message only: we have to find a cure for cancer.
Right.
So that's why we had it. And needless to say, on a beach, we have dogs.
We got dogs on the beach.
We have lovely dogs.
It's amazing on a beach like this. For anyone listening, it goes on for kilometers. Yeah. And we're set up doing a podcast. Now, I know Bill's a giant celebrity here in White Rock, but what's happening is people just seem to gravitate towards wherever they can make the most amount of whatever, get in our way. But
well, it works. It's not unlike the Terry Fox run. You couldn't depend on what was going to happen on the other day. We're going back to what it was like at that time. That summer was unbelievably hot and humid, southern Ontario, and it was along that stretch of road, Highway 7, Peterborough, heading Toronto when the heat started getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
He could run in the rain, in the snow, in any weather. What he had a problem was running into the wind, which, by the way, is the title of Steve Nash's documentary that he did about Terry, which you should try and see sometime. It's called Into the Wind.
Okay.
And that was very difficult. And I'm going to tell you quickly a very funny story.
Sure. We want funny stories.
They had tried it once before. This one day, we're close to Peterborough, and the wind's very strong. So what they try and do is they open the back door of his van, and Daryl sits on the back bumper, his younger brother, and Doug's trying to drive at the same pace as Terry. And Terry's running as close to the van as he possibly can. Well, after about 4 or 5 miles, he's got to take his break, and he said, the exhaust, I'm having a horrible time running for the exhaust. So while he's sleeping, I go down the road to a gas station, tell them my problem, and they give me one of those muffler tubes, the expandable things,
right,
that we take some chicken wire and put it around the exhaust pipe, run it up the back ladder of his motorhome, and tie it to one of the racks up on top. So Doug, his buddy, is sitting up, and he's the guy that's been up there wiring it up. And Daryl's in the driver's seat, and we're sitting in the parking lot where Terry's been sleeping in the motel. And so Doug says, "Turn it on and we'll see if it's working." With his face right in the
exhaust.
tube, Daryl starts the car, and Doug's face turns completely black from soot coming out of the thing. And like there's 30, 40 people in the parking lot. Well, of course, everybody roaring and laughing. Terry throws the door open, livid because we've woke him up, and he's about to yell at us when he looks up at Doug on the thing, and then he just breaks up. And he said, "Okay, I can't sleep anymore," and off we go.
And off he went. It sounds like a live-action red-green show.
Yeah.
That's where they got the ideas from. I mean, obviously there's some heaviness there. I appreciate that story, and everyone will too, because I want to know the funny side of him as well. Like, what kind of guy was he?
He was on the road, on the run, focused. Everybody knows how difficult it was to run. And I had said to him before he got to Ontario, I said, when you get to Ontario, you do the running, we'll do everything else. So during the day, he was focused. There is some stories about he had a little bit of a temper. Well, if he had a temper, it was usually at us.
Right.
The team, because here's a guy running a marathon, and he comes up to his rest spot, waiting. We're supposed to have his oranges and water ready. Now this only happened once actually. I'm exaggerating. It only happened once, but he runs up to us, and we're in the middle of a water gun fight. Well, needless to say, he loses it on us.
Right.
Rips us one. And then 2 minutes later, he's in the middle of the water gun fight himself.
Yeah.
He's picked up a bucket of water and he's starting to throw it at other people. So at the end of the day, when he was able to relax, he had a wonderful sense of humor like his dad, dry sense of humor, always joking. He liked the company of children. He was more comfortable hanging out with kids. My son and my daughter, who were 8 and 9 at the time, traveled with us for almost the entire run, except for the section through Toronto when it was just crazy.
Yeah.
But he spent a lot of time with them. One time up north of the Sioux, we get into an area where there's tiny little motels, and the entourage can't stay, so we're, for about 3 days, backtracking. We're leaving Terry and Doug at a motel, and we're all backtracking into the Sioux. And one day we get back to the hotel in the Sioux, and we can't find Patrick, who is 8 years old. And is he with you? No, I thought he was in your car. So we call back to the hotel, and it takes us a while. But anyway, we get Doug on the phone, and we say, "Have you seen Patrick?" And Doug said, "Yeah, Terry hid him under his bed until you guys left. They've gone fishing."
I would imagine... well, he was a hero to all Canadians, but to kids especially, he would have been a superhero. So your kids growing up in that, what a privilege for them to have that as part of their story of life, of being able to know him and hang with him and be close to him, when so many people around the country would have loved anything to just spend any time with him.
I think the older they get, by the way, the more they appreciate and understand it.
Yeah.
But at the end of that summer, we had moved from Welland, Ontario to Toronto. So they started a new school, and of course, I think grade 6 or 7, whatever they're in, you have to write an essay how I spent my summer vacation. And they wrote about spending it with Terry Fox, and the teachers didn't believe them.
Right.
And they had to come back the next day with pictures to show
the whole thing and prove it.
we were with Terry. So.
Wouldn't have that issue now with social media.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone would be Instagramming it like crazy.
That's for people to understand that our way of communicating back then was payphones.
Yeah.
How we communicated to the public was radio. They still have them. Every radio station has one of those radio station cars. We're down at Joe's car dealership.
Sure.
In the super. Well, that's how we communicated, because we pull into town and every radio station would have a car with us. Well, Terry's schedule was not, we run to 6, we sleep till 9. It was, we run till I'm tired.
Gotcha.
So you've got, 5-6 miles of people lined up, and suddenly Terry's got to go for a nap. How do you communicate with those people? You know, Terry's not coming down the road. So at 40 years ago, all the radio stations would announce, you know, we're at, you know, wherever we are, Terry's had to take a break. He'll be back on the road in about an hour. We'll let you know when he's back on the road. So that's how back then we communicated.
I was going to ask you about that, like your daily schedule. So once it becomes kind of frantic, were you, your job personally at this point, did it take on a couple different roles, or were you always obviously for the Canadian Cancer Society, you were their spokesperson, you were the person running the ship here, but does your role change on this trip? More like into a support role, and then when it blows up, obviously, are you spending any time with them at that point? Or are you forward?
Well,
getting it done.
It was actually what happened is the Cancer Society started to pressure me because I was spending too much time with Terry. So I was having to leave them on the road, drive back to Toronto, do whatever I was theoretically supposed to do, which was basically do more publicity for Terry from back there, and then go back out and join him on the road. I'd say, oh my God, by the time we were out of Kitchener, I had probably been threatened to be fired 3 or 4 times by the Cancer Society. Then there was a real big blow up just north of Toronto when the guy who was organizing that district booked 2 events in the same night. And he had already done it once before in Oakville. And I had to go and tell Terry while he was on his break, and I come in with his sandwich, and I tell him, you know, we've got 2 events, and he goes, I'm not going to do it. And I went, yeah, I know, I understand, I'm not going to do it. And he refused, and I said, well, if you don't do it, they're going to fire me, which they had told me. They had sent somebody up from downtown Toronto, said, he either goes to these 2 events or you're off the run and you're fired from your job.
And what were the events?
Just receptions. But they're 10 miles apart.
Right.
So he's got to finish a run. He's run 26 miles. He probably has to run or drive 3 or 4 miles to go to a reception. And now they want him to drive 20 miles to another reception.
Right. And these were, you know, coming back to your point about going forward, going backwards. If the reception is up the street, he's like, I'm not going.
No, exactly.
It has to be behind me.
So anyway, long story short, he did go. Mm-hmm. He went to both receptions. We didn't speak for a couple of days, and as a matter of fact, it was a Friday, and I actually left the run, went back to my apartment, and then I got a call from Doug saying, you've got to come back right away. He's really grumpy. He's not talking to anybody, and it's not good at all. So by that time, he's in Barrie, and I drive up to Barrie. And I get there, and he's on his break, his 8 o'clock in the morning break. So I go and sit in the hotel room, the Holiday Inn in Barrie, I remember exactly. And I'm sitting on the floor waiting for him. And the door opens, he comes out. And he'd gotten snippy with a couple of people. Sure. He'd never, ever done that, I mean the public. And I said, look, I'm sorry for what happened. It will never happen again. But you have to be careful about what you say in public, because if they think you're getting an attitude, the press will tear you down as fast as they put you up. And he was very emotional, and he said to me, Bill, I just want to go home. I want to go home the fastest way I can. I don't want to go out of my way anymore. I want to go home. And I said, you will never be taken out of your way again. And I promise you that. I'll get you home. And then both of us started to cry.
Right.
And we hugged each other, and we're in the hallway. And then we stepped back from each other, and we kind of go, okay, we can't let anybody see us crying. I said, we're on a new game. You go out that door, I'll go out that door. We go up. And after that, in my mind, I did not work for the Cancer Society anymore.
You worked for Terry.
I'm now
those
for Terry.
Those stories are classic. I think on one side he stands up he stands up and goes and does these events so you don't get fired, but lays the ground and says absolutely no more. And at that point, if the Cancer Society says, hey, he's got to do these 4 events, and you say nope, he's absolutely not doing them, Bill, if you don't do them, they're fired. Do you tell them, piss off. I'm not with you anymore. I'm here to support Terry the rest of the way.
It happened.
It did.
That exactly happened.
Great.
Okay, we're going to go 2, maybe 3 days after that incident.
Sure.
And my children can tell you this story because now we're meeting with the organizer for Sudbury, and they're executives, and they're business people in their community, and we're sitting at a dinner table. We're having dinner, and there's about 10 people at this dinner, including my kids who are 8 and 9 years old.
Yeah.
And the other guy's sitting at the far end of the table, and he said, when we get to Sudbury, we're going to have him run into town and right up to City Hall. And I said, no, Lou, he's not doing that. We're taking the bypass. And then we'll drive into City Hall to the reception.
Sure.
And he went, no, we'll make more money, the people on the road. And I said, no, people will come and see him at City Hall. Trust me. He's not going to run the downtown. It got very heated.
Yeah.
To the point where he's going, you either get him to run that downtown or you're fired. And I'm going, Lou, it's not going to happen. And he'd say something. It got to the point, honest to God, I honestly did this. I went, yeah, he's not going to run. I don't care what you say.
Yeah.
And I've got these guys in business suits, probably a doctor or something from Sudbury, going, you can't talk to him that way. And I said, well, he's not going to run. He's taking the bypass. There is no way. Zero.
Whose run is it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Whose run is it?
By that point, we had, and good that you point that up, because by the time we were, it really happened after Toronto, but then as we got out north of Toronto, he started to go, it's not my run anymore. It's not my run anymore. They're making me stuff. I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
And that's when I really became, I wasn't normally that childish, but if somebody isn't going to listen to me, I don't care. Like, I actually told the guy to F off in this dinner. And my kids still remember, Dad, I remember you going, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when it, as we talked about before, it was here, like, then it blows up, and then everyone wants to own it. But everyone forgets that there's, a boy alone, and he's a man, sure, but he's still alone.
He's a boy.
Running.
There's 3 kids. There's 3 kids. 17, 21, and 20. They're kids.
Yeah. And he's running alone. And everyone wants to own him. It must have been ridiculously nerve-wracking. But I guess, the balance to it is like, the more press, the more money, and all the rest of it. So, yeah, it would have been.
The ending of that story, by the way, that guy
yeah.
became one of Terry's biggest boosters, and was with us right up until Thunder Bay.
The guy you had to fight with.
The guy I had to fight with when he hadn't traveled with us yet.
Sure.
So once he took over into his district, he completely changed. And that happened, for instance, it happened with the OPP. There was the odd occasion where, they had this wonderful escort from the time that we crossed the border right until the very end. But there was a couple of occasions, particularly, an officer given the detail at 5 o'clock in the morning to drive 4 miles an hour. And initially they'd show up and not happy that they've been assigned this. 2 hours, 2 miles traveling behind Terry, they're off, caps off, and it's hands out the window trying to collect money.
Sure.
Immediately changed. As soon as they saw and met and talked to him, changed immediately.
Immediately. Wow. I would imagine so. I mean, just seeing him in person, and then obviously later on, Rick goes out, Hansen goes out. Like there's been a lot of different things since, and it's been amazing to watch. So legacy kind of move on when it comes to that. So we'll take a break for a sec, and we're going to come back and talk about Bill. We're going to talk about the movie that came out, and Robert Duvall playing you, and sort of how accurate it was, and kind of dive into your thoughts on that process and Night Heat and a few other things that we've got for Canadian television. So we'll be right back.
Okay.
All right. So I'm a big Robert Duvall fan, and you must have been, like, were you blown away when he was cast as you in this movie? Because they made a movie about this, and we'll kind of get into that side of it. But I'm curious as to, was this story building, and as the thing kind of built, was there people already coming on board saying we need to make a movie about this right away, or was it sort of after the process, after it all had ended and Terry had passed, or was it kind of being put together while you guys were doing it?
There was nothing that during the actual run, although that movie idea came up very quickly after the run.
Mm-hmm.
It was to become HBO's first feature movie that they made, and Robert Cooper was the producer, and again, this is shortly after the run. They hire the Kastner family to write the story. And I go over to Mrs. Castor's house, who's passed away. And I remember the first time I went there, she had this big tray of alcohol. And she said, "Can I make you drink?" And I said, "I don't have to drink to tell Terry a story."
Right.
So I went there probably 7 or 8 times.
Yeah.
And told my story as I knew it. And then we skip ahead maybe 8 months. And when the movie's going to go into production, and I know nothing about the movie.
Sure.
All I know is Eric Fryer has been cast as to play Terry, and I'm called down to the office, and I've also been told that there is a name been cast to be in the movie. No idea who or what role.
Sure.
So I show up at the production office, and I'm looking at the cast list, and I'm looking, and I see Chris Makepeace, and I think to myself, well, that's got to be Daryl.
Right.
And Megan Fallows, and I'm thinking, well, that's got to be Judith. And then I look, and there's a R. Duvall. And I went, no, couldn't be.
No way.
No way. So anyway, almost immediately, I'm called upstairs into the producer's office with his assistant, and we're talking about the movie. And by the way, I had held out for a long time, and they thought I wanted money.
To consult?
Yeah, they thought I wanted money, when in fact all I wanted to do was read the script and make sure the story was real and truthful.
Sure. And they obviously consulted the family and everything that went with it.
So anyway, I go up and I meet with him, and the producer says, "Do you know who's playing you?" And I went, "No, I haven't a clue." And he went, "It's, well, he's going to be here in a minute." So I'm sitting there, and the door opens, and in walks Robert Duvall, and inside my head the voice says, "Holy shit, it's Robert Duvall."
Right.
Well, he comes in.
Consigliere, you know?
Yeah, and introduce, and we sit there for maybe 20 minutes, and then we go out for dinner.
Yeah.
The 4 of us, and then we come back to the office, and then Duvall says, "I want to spend a half an hour with Bill." So he and I just sat there, and I guess he wanted to learn about me.
Yeah.
And then we talked for a while, and at the end he said, "Is there anything you want to say?" And I said, "I'm not a used car salesman, and I loved him."
Yeah.
And he went, "What?" And I said, "I'm not a used car salesman, and I loved him." "I got it," is what he said. So
He played it.
I was not a flim-flam man. The guy I did work at the Carney when I was in high school, but I couldn't. All I wanted to go is him to know that I did the best I could for him.
And kudos to Robert to take that role. I mean, obviously actors get offered lots of roles, but this is like a Canadian kid running across the country. You're played by an American actor. Like, you know, this would be something normally produced by the CBC or something, you know, and it's like, hey, we're gonna get Bruno Garussi to play Bill.
Well, yeah.
And
I actually go downstairs after that meeting, go to my cell phone, which is the payphone out in front, call my wife and go, "You're never going to believe who's playing me in the movie." And she said, "Who?" And I said, "Robert Duvall." And she said, "Who's that?" And I said, "The Godfather." She said, "The blonde guy." And I went, No, that's James Caan." "Well, maybe if I see his picture, I'll know who you're talking about."
Right.
Which was helpful because suddenly my head went from here down to here.
Sure.
And over the years, it was surreal.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain. Now, 40 years later, I think I don't know if this sounds weird, but I think it's funny that Robert Duvall played me in a movie.
Yeah.
There was another movie, second movie by CTV that had Sean Ashmore that played Terry.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry I forget the actor's name, but he did actually a better job. The first movie
Of playing you.
Yeah.
Right.
The first movie cast Terry too much as this angry young man, which he was not in any way, shape, or form. The second movie, I think, told the story better about who Terry was. And there's been a number of documentaries. And if your listeners want to know about Terry, the very first one, which was called I Had a Dream, which was the very first documentary, and all the other documentaries most of the footage that you see of Terry was from that original one. But the best documentary that told the story about Terry was Steve Nash's Into the Wind.
Yeah, and we'll make sure we get a link for that up on everything
It was on
to check it out.
It was 2020, one of that series.
And the family was happy with both movies, yeah?
They weren't happy with the first one.
They weren't happy
with the first one. They were very happy with the second one.
Excellent.
But again, the best way to look at them is the documentaries. Of course, the documentaries don't show you. Both the movies show that blow up that I had with Terry.
Right.
But neither of them show it actually how it actually was. The very first one has Duvall sitting on a closed toilet seat while Terry's in the bathtub.
Gotcha.
And we're having a very calm conversation.
Right.
When in fact it was a very emotional conversation that ended up, and it was like in the movie it goes, okay, Bill, okay, Terry. In the real life, it was two guys holding on to each other sobbing.
Yeah. Well, Hollywood comes to the mix. So, well, that's a great time, though. I mean, it's something that no one, Robert Duvall played you in a movie. So
it was, and
Howdy Doody would play me in a movie. So,
I've always said, quite seriously, there should have been Dom DeLuise if they really wanted to have a guy play Bill Viggers. And Peter DeLuise, who's a good friend of mine, he's the director. I've told him that because I started working with him on Stargate. First thing I said is, your dad should have been me in the movie.
Obviously, it leads to a bunch of acting stuff. I want to come back to Wawa to Thunder Bay. So, obviously, the last run here, and kind of walk us through where everyone was at mentally. Terry, yourself, everybody, before you really knew that it was coming to an end. Like there was
no
seeing
hint,
him struggling. It was like,
there was no hint, right up until the very beginning, or right to the very end, rather, that the cancer was returning. He had a cough the last 4 or 5 days, which we thought was just the flu. So he had a problem with his ankle, just north of Wawa. We had to fly him back to the Sioux. We got him off his feet for a day and a half. We came back out. So those last 7 to 10 days of the run were high highs and then low lows. Greg Scott, who Terry had met in Hamilton from Welland, an amputee, 10 years old. Family, we fly him up. He joins us in Terrace Bay. Terry, he rides his bike along, Terry, for half the day.
Right.
And Terry he said that was his most inspirational day. When you see the documentaries, he talks about Greg. That night, we all went swimming in Jackfish Lake with the kids, too, and everybody playing. And to show you Terry's, and you never see it in the documentaries, but in the documentaries, you see Terry sitting on the beach, and then he gets up and uses his artificial legs sort of as a cane, hopping back to go get changed. Well, in the documentaries, it always starts with him turning around and smile. What you don't see is a split second after that, he drops his drawers and he moons everybody.
It's a great sense of humor.
Later that night, we have fireworks on the beach.
Yeah.
I've gotten a bunch of Roman candles. I don't know where I got them. Well, it's a rock beach, and I stick the candles in the rocks. I light like 5 of them all together, and they all fall over, and they're laying on their sides, and now they're shooting at a campground with a bunch of people in their trailers.
Right.
And Terry's going, Bill, got to do something.
Oh my God.
Greg goes home. The weather's bad. My mom and dad's wedding anniversary are coming up. On the Thursday, the kids say goodbye to Terry. Terry signs them posters. They've still got them on their walls. We fly down to St. Thomas, Ontario. I'm supposed to go back on the Sunday night, but I know there's going to be a big argument about the bypass in Thunder Bay. I'd already talked to Doug and Daryl and the other guy saying there's no way he's taking. I said, if anything happens, because a couple of times he had blood on his shorts,
Yeah.
and the media blew it completely out of proportion.
Sure.
And he did say, if I had to stop every time I was bleeding on my shorts, I'd still be in New Brunswick. And
Yeah.
so I call. I've still got this piece of paper. I'm sitting at the kitchen table of my home down there, and I'm calling to let them know I'm not coming back until tomorrow, the next day. And I can't find them. And I'm calling the hotel they're supposed to no, they don't know where he is. I finally end up calling the OPP. They don't know where he is. It's that moment that I knew something was wrong, because the OPP knew he was. And I have a piece of paper sitting at the table where I'm writing, over and over the same words, what the F is going on.
Right.
Because I knew there's something wrong. And I'm sitting there and I'm writing, and I write it, and then I'm retracing it, and I'm retracing. Finally, I get somebody on the phone, and they said Terry's in the hospital, and they think the cancer's back. So 9 o'clock at night, I am in Toronto Airport at 5 o'clock in the morning trying to get on a flight. I arrive in Thunder Bay the same time Mom and Dad do from the east, or from the west. We drive to the hospital, we go in, Mom and Dad go in and visit. Then they call Terry and Daryl and I in, and Terry tells us that the cancer's gone back, and it was a shock, unbelievable, devastation. And then we're told you have to get him home today because his lungs are filling with fluid, and if he doesn't get home today, he's going to have to stay here for a week. So I go in to get him. I've got to ditch the emotions. I got to find a way to get him home. So we're across the street in the Cancer Society office. We're on the phone trying to find a private jet. We're talking to the Toronto Star. We're talking to other corporate sponsors. We can get something to take us to Winnipeg, but then he's going to have to take Air Canada home. We say that's not going to work. So that gentleman I talked about before I had the big argument, he's on the phone with Ontario Health.
Yeah.
And he's saying, I need a jet. And they're saying, well, who's going to pay for it? And he said, that's your problem.
Get us a jet right
Figure
now.
it out. Get us a jet up here. We need it now.
Right now.
And the lady's kept saying, well, who's going to pay for it? And finally he says, lady, I've got all the Canadian media standing outside my door. Do you want me to walk out there and tell them that the Ontario government will not fly Terry Fox home?
Right.
One moment, sir.
One moment.
30 seconds later, there'll be a plane there in an hour and a half.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Then I get a call that Terry wants to see me. By the way, in between that is Terry hated hospital food, and he'd ask, can I go out for lunch? And the hospital says, yeah. So we're going to go jump in the car and take him to a restaurant for lunch. And so we coming up the emergency room, and it's Mom and Dad and me and Terry, and we get halfway across the street heading towards the car, and I'm on one side of him and Raleigh's on the other, and suddenly Terry collapses, and we catch him going down. The medical staff are watching from the door. They come running out with a gurney, get him in the gurney, rush him back into the hospital. Now I'm trying to get the plane, that story I just told you. And somebody runs in the door and says, Terry wants to see you right away. This is a half an hour later. So I have no idea what's happened in that half hour. Mm-hmm. And it's like a movie. I run across the street, push the elevator door. It wasn't fast enough. And I run up 5 flights of stairs into his room. And by the way, when he collapsed, his shoe fell off. And I had picked up his shoe, and I went, I'm going to hang on to this. This is history.
Yeah.
So I run into his room, and he's sitting on the side of the bed, and he's all dressed, and he goes, have you seen my other shoe? Yeah, I got it.
It's an emergency. Get up here right now with my shoe. Yeah. Amazing.
So then we get him across the street and in the basement, and it's time to go upstairs to do that press conference, which everybody knows about. And They roll him to the bottom of the stairs, and he gets off the gurney, and they say, "No, we're going to carry you up." And he said, "No, I'm going to walk up. I'm not going to let you carry me up."
Yeah.
So he walked up the stairs, and just outside the door, just before he came out, he got back into the gurney, and then he made his speech. Then it's time for the ride to the, and that's ride to the airport. So we get in the ambulance, and there's Mom and Dad at his head, and a doctor at his feet, and that's going to accompany him home. And I'm on one side, and Christy Blatchford, the reporter for the Toronto Star, is on the other side. And Terry's, and it's quiet. Nobody's saying anything. And then Dad says, "This is so unfair. This is so unfair." And Terry said, "About what?" And he said, "About the cancer come back. It's just not fair." And Terry goes, "Dad, there's nothing fair about cancer. I'm no different than anybody else.
Yeah.
Cancer comes back." And he said, "It's nothing about fair." And then there's a pause, and then Terry said, "Maybe now people will understand why I was doing it." And it had reached the point where he felt that people had put him up on a pedestal, were calling him a hero, that they had lost focus of why he was doing it, that he was doing it to raise funds to find a cure for cancer. And he knew that the country was now going to watch him deal with chemotherapy and radiation and fight this disease. And he said, now maybe people will understand and try a little harder.
Yeah. And it to your point, it makes it there's a point where it starts, what is this story? And then it builds to, wow, look at this story. And then it turns into not realistic anymore. Like, it just turns into this massive thing where we touched on, where it takes away from, like, whose race is it? Right? And
yeah,
as much as he's racing for cancer and all the rest of it, he's also trying to do it for himself. He's racing.
Yeah.
Right? And to have it stop the race, and it just brings it down to reality. And like, obviously everyone would have loved to have that story turn out different, and it was just a pause, and then he was back to it, and he was whatever. But the reality of that disease showed everybody the reality of what he was doing. And I dare I say, you know, the legacy of him. Well, I mean, cancer takes so many people a year. It's not like he's not the poster child for cancer, because it's in everyone's home, it's in everyone's everything. But I think that when that race ended, it made this whole thing, it just doubled everything. Like, it just took it to this whole other, we need to do this for Terry now.
Yeah.
Like, we have to finish this race. So many people tried to finish the race.
His mom said he was put on this earth for a purpose.
Yeah.
And I stood on the tarmac, and I hugged him goodbye, and the plane took off, and I was told if somebody wants to talk to me on the phone, and I went into the airport, back to that payphone, and it was as it happens. And one of the things I said, actually it was the last thing I said in that interview, this isn't the end, this is just the beginning. And that day in Thunder Bay really was just the beginning.
It really was. Yeah. If you think about it.
You know, it's 40 years later. He exemplifies every good attribute I think Canadians are proud of. Mm-hmm. The toughness, the honesty, the sincerity, the standing up for what is the right thing. And I marvel at that I was part of it, and why I was part of it. To this day, I think for a long time after the run, I was kind of messed up because of how it ended.
Sure.
But as years go by, I'm I'm so proud of that moment in time when I was able to do something that made a difference.
Yeah.
And to be part of a legacy that continues on. I was in my Patrick now teaches in China, and
Your son?
Yeah, Patrick, my son, teaches in China, and I went there to visit him, and he was sick, and he was supposed to accompany his students to a run in Guangzhou. He was in a city called Changsha. He's sick, he can't go, he's in the hospital. He said, Dad, you're going to have to go and represent me. And I went with 120 16-year-old kids out of control on the bullet train down to Guangzhou. And the run is held on a very high-end golf course. And we're out on the shooting range is where the run's going to take place, or whatever you call that. I don't play golf.
Driving range.
The driving range. But we've got, the governor of the province. We've got the consular general for Canada. We have the mayor of, a town of 10 million people. And I'm looking out at 8,000 Chinese kids wearing the exact same Terry Fox T-shirt as was in Canada that year. And they're running for Terry Fox. 8,000 kids, and that's just one run in China. There's about 6 or 7 of them. In Havana, I think 2 million people run every year. It's called Terry Fox Sunday, and they just come on national radio at 10 o'clock and say, okay, it's time to go, and people just run out of their houses.
Do you think, because in Canada we know this story, and I've told this story to a lot of American friends and people from around the world, but this story still is told every year due to, obviously, the runs and the things that are happening. I always feel like there's still more to tell about his story, but there's more to tell just in general. Is he truly global now, or is he still, like, after all of this, there's still more to do to get his legacy out there and what he was trying to do?
Well, there's still more to do, and that's raise funds for cancer research, and nothing irritates me more than once in a while you read somebody, they've got a cure for cancer, they're just hiding it. That's ludicrous. That's ridiculous. If you take the time, for instance, just go to the Terry Fox Research website, and you'll see just what Terry's done, not let alone what is being done in other areas around the world to try and find a cure for this disease, but the projects that Terry's financed and efforts and the massive advances they've made in treating. There's so many different kinds of cancer. That's the other thing people don't understand. That there's a long way to go, and I'd be remiss, by the way, you brought up telling the story every year, that if I did not recognize the education system in Canada and the teachers who continue telling each generation the legacy of Terry Fox and using him as a teaching tool for not just subjects like geography and mathematics and how far he ran and things, but integrity and selflessness and contributing to the community and doing the right thing in life and hard work. Terry was no different than anyone. Any different than you and I. He was just a regular guy who was just incredibly focused. And he was an athlete. He got all of those awards, by the way. They right after the run, they were naming schools after him and mountains and streets. He was honored. Don't get me wrong, he was really honored. But the only one that he got really excited about is when he was named the Lou Marsh Athlete of the Year Award, because what he perceived, his journey was an athletic achievement, which if you talk to any professional or any athlete or any runner, like all those professional athletes that we met on the run, whether for the Bobby Orr, the Darryl Sittlers, the football players, the baseball players, to a man, to a woman, they said the same thing. None of us we don't know anybody who could do what you're doing, running a marathon a day. It's impossible.
It seems impossible. It really does. I run 5K and I'm like, 10K. I'm like, wow. I got runner friends in my life that do a lot of it, and I'm always
I take the stairs. I get exhausted,
I'm always marveled by it. So
I'm exhausted pushing the elevator button.
It's one of the greatest feats I would say anybody in the world has ever accomplished, let alone a Canadian, to cement that legacy as one of the greatest achievements by a human, I would say, in the history of the world. So it's incredible. I'm so happy that his message is still getting out there. I'm so happy that he did this. I'm so happy that the legacy moves on. What do you want people to remember about or to think about him that we already don't know about Terry? What don't we know about him that people should know?
When I think of Terry, and that's why I wear this shirt.
It's a fine-looking shirt, by the way.
By the way, it's my favorite shirt, and if you're on...
You'll see it on the video that we're doing, yeah.
Yep, and I know a lot of people are listening, but the shirt I'm wearing is a black shirt with a silhouette of Terry's smile.
Yeah.
It's a big, big smile. He was happy doing what he did. He lived long enough to see that we'd raised $1 for every Canadian. He would be... I always avoid saying people, well, if he was today, what would he be doing? I do know he'd be continuing the fight against cancer. But I think a lot of people know a lot of stuff about Terry. But you ask me what is the one thing that he was a regular guy, that he was a funny guy, that he was like you and me, and that particularly young people, you can do it. You set your mind to something, you can do it. Or you give it your best shot. You leave it all out there on the court. You might not win every time, you not finish every race, but you want to walk away from the game going, I did my best.
Yeah. Well, he certainly gave every ounce of himself to us, Canadians, cancer survivors, victims, all over the world. His legacy lives on. And for everyone listening that aren't familiar with his story, please do everything you can to research it, because it's an amazing journey. That he's one of the most, as I said, second most popular Canadian of all time, I believe. In that regard, to me, he's the most important Canadian that we've had. So I'm going to put a bunch of stuff up on the site. I'm going to put a bunch of stuff on stuff. There's a brand new book called Forever Terry that we're going to dive into in a second. We're just going to take another break and we're going to run into the water. All right, we'll see you in a bit. All right, we're going to wrap it up here with a couple little stories. So this is all done. It's time to move on. What's next for Bill Viggers after the Marathon of Hope? What happens to you next in life?
Well, after the Marathon of Hope, by the way, the Cancer Society that had threatened to fire me several times finally did.
They finally fired you.
For having too many parking tickets. And it was precipitated by the April campaign came along, and the people who were knocking on the doors were coming back and saying, the guys on the doors are saying, what do you need more money for? You raised so much with Terry.
Right.
And so I went to my boss and said, you're not telling the story where the research... This is the next year, by the way, long before it gets rolling and everything happens. And I'm told by the head of Cancer Society for all of Canada that there's no need for us to tell it, and if we did, the public wouldn't understand it. And he got mad at me for saying that, to the point where I subsequently found out that I was told to get rid of, too many parking tickets. After that, people thought I was the greatest whiz of PR guy.
Right.
Hill and Knowlton came along, and I was dealing with Terry. Terry was, I wasn't a PR guy. I was the guy trying to put the run together. So, for instance, Hill and Knowlton gave me some projects to rate, should we sponsor them. Well, there was a couple of stuff in there, like I'm sure the name escapes me, but there's the wonderful Daredevil skiing, snow skiing documentaries. And I thought, who the hell wants to watch documentaries on skiing? Of course, I'm from Ontario. What do I know?
Sure.
So anyway, I ended up doing PR and fundraising for the Toronto General Hospital and then St. Mike's Hospital. And then somebody asked me if I want to do PR. My background had been in radio. I had been a manager of Chamber of Commerce. I'd run a Radio Shack franchise. Before I started with Terry, it was a low point in my life. And I know it's a wonderful career, but I was selling life insurance. I was not cut out for that.
Right.
So somebody comes along and said, you want to do public or PR, publicity for a television show. And it was called Night Heat.
Right.
Which was on CTV and CBS at the time. And my immediate reaction was, yeah, I've never done that before. So I spent 5 years on that show, and it became very popular, won all kinds of awards. And the call time every night was like 5 o'clock in the afternoon and ended at 5 o'clock in the morning. So there's hours and hours of standing around the set and what I had to do where you're doing nothing. So I started playing an extra.
Right.
And I ended up, I think it was in 27 episodes, as either a drag queen or a drunk. And I got, got to the point where they're giving me lines.
You didn't have any experience with any of those either. You had to, you had to act, right?
Well, I was, yeah. Actually, we had one of the electrics. He had long hair, and we used to both love it.
Yeah.
And of course, the hair and makeup people would go all out.
Yeah.
And I remember a couple of times we're in the background in a cell, and with the other people who are just normal extras. But there was one guy in one show we're doing it where we're grabbing the other guy's butt.
Yeah.
And he's not liking it at all, to the point where he actually pushed me. And they loved it. They thought we were acting. We weren't acting at all. So I did that and a bunch of other shows, and I partied way too much. And
it was the 80s.
In '94, I decided that I had to change my life, and I left Toronto for Vancouver Island with $500 in my pocket and no place to live, and got out here and had a friend ran into somebody, and they were a sports fishing boat coming out of Victoria that was going up to the Queen Charlotte Island. We're desperate for a cook, chef.
Oh.
So I said, can you cook? Yeah. So I had somebody back in Toronto lie for me, say I was a chef. So I fly up to the Queen Charlotte Islands, where it's a ship anchored offshore of the one of the islands, and I show up with a New York Times cookbook and a melon scooper.
And you're winging it.
And I'm winging it.
How many people are you cooking for?
I'm cooking for 25 Americans up there to kill some fish.
Yeah. And
a crew of 10.
Right.
Of course, the Americans want really nice food, which was, and thank God, the only thing that saved me was it was a repeat menu. So one night was roast beef, the next night was chicken, the next night was fish, and then it repeated. But when I first go there, I get off the boat, and the guy I'm replacing says, what do you want to make for lunch? And I said, how about beef stroganoff? And he said, well, we don't normally have it, but yeah, sure. And I said, where's the Campbell's soup? My idea of making Campbell's beef stroganoff was open a can of mushroom soup.
And there you go.
And he said, oh, we make everything from scratch here. And I went, oh, my God, what have I done? So for the first...
Did they starve for the first 2 days?
I thought of throwing myself down the stairs and breaking my arm.
Right.
And the only thing that saved me was the guy I was replacing stayed for 3 days.
Yeah.
And as fast as he was cooking, I wrote down what he was doing. And the guy said to me, well, no one's ever done that before. And I said, well, why try and reinvent the wheel? And, of course, then I'm trying to make a Caesar salad. I'm that New York Times cookbook. Caesar salad for $6, and I got to make it for $25, okay? And anyway, I lasted 6 weeks, called him back up, and I had handed out some resumes back in Victoria. Lasted 6 weeks. Went back to Salt Spring Island. They called me, do you want to go back up as the night cook? I went back up for 2 weeks. And then in September, I'm walking down the street of Victoria, and I'm wearing a suit and tie, and I meet one of the university students who was part of the crew, and he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm the head of communications for the Ministry of Small Business, Tourism, and Culture. And the guy goes, I thought you were a chef.
Right.
And I went, no, man, I'd never cooked before in my life. And he went, we kind of wondered about that.
When Carl started throwing up on the side of the boat, did you? I guess
we tested. We knew how well I was doing, depending on what the condition of the toilets were.
Sure, and the other side would be like when they threw a fish down in front of you. Could you actually fillet it?
Yeah.
Right. What's this guy doing?
Yeah.
Did you get any other acting gigs out of that, or was that did that part of your world end, and then there's the final, career part that you settled into?
Well, when I finished Night Heat, by the way, I actually did try to take up an acting career, and wouldn't you know, I auditioned for a Molson's commercial, and it was for a rubby, believe it or not, in a pool room, and it came down to me and another guy, and I didn't get it, and I was so devastated, I never tried again.
Oh.
Talk about not learning a lesson from Terry, but at the same time, I had a photo. I forgot you had to have talent.
Getting by on funny just didn't work, eh?
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I worked for the government for a couple of years, and once again, I get a call from somebody saying, and by the way, I never wanted to go back in the film business again. I was done with it. And got a call and said, can you help me with it? It was a TV show called Madison. And I went, nope, don't want anything to do with it. And they said, we'll pay you this much. And I said, when do I start?
Right. Pays better than fish.
Yeah. So that's what I did. I went back, and that was my first gig.
Yeah.
I took an actress by the name of Jolie Collins, who was Phil Collins' daughter,
Yeah.
on a tour of Ontario, and we did extremely well. And I think that's almost 25 years later, and her and I are still to this day the best of friends.
That's great.
I can tell you some funny Phil stories too.
Oh, I can't wait to get into that story next. My dad was a huge Phil.
So anyway, I went back in
fan,
the film business, and I worked on Stargate and Corner Gas and Cold Squad. Never. I'm just trying to think. I don't think I ever did any roles.
What is the role of that? Before we wrap, but what is the role of a PR person for a TV show?
For a television show, you get hired when it starts. You're trying to convince people it's the greatest thing since sliced bread,
right?
Even though they haven't even shot one episode once. So I had to. Luckily, there was never on the television show end of it. There was never a bad show that I was not proud of. Like, to be part of Corner Gas, to be part of Stargate, to be part of Cold Squad. It was an interesting cop show. One was Cold Squad, one was Night Heat.
Right.
One was worked 100 episodes on one.
Yeah.
The other one, I think I worked almost 100. But at the end of Cold Squad, which was the second show, I'd get the script and go, didn't we already do this?
Yeah, just reversed it on Night Heat.
Oh, no, that was Night Heat.
There's no greater, harder gig in the world than being a PR person for Canadian programming. So good for you.
Yeah.
Because that would have been trying to upsell. I mean, we all love the Beachcombers, but the idea would have been, so we've got this idea about these loggers that are gonna, do. And there's a villain, but he's not really a villain. And sure, let's just put it on the air. So kudos to you for going down that road and making.
I took great pride in trying to make Canadian actors, because they are as talented.
Yeah.
And it's coming to fruition now. You see so many of them. But even back then, there were so many of them that were so talented, and I was happy that my weird ideas of promoting a show would work. We did one called Dead for a Day, and it was to be a dead person on Cold Squad.
Right.
And there was, even the government I used to do promotions for, and they'd go, well, we want to launch this project. And we came up with an idea, and I said, well, why don't we get a front-end loader in the C-bus terminal, and it'll come and dump all these, and they look at you like you've lost your mind. And then they'd call me 2 days later and say, can we actually do that? And I went, yeah, because I had worked in the film business. I knew how to do stuff that would work.
Right. Our Canadian movies and television business takes a lot of shit, but there's been some great Corner Gas, Schitt's Creek, like all these things that
There's a show out right now called Transplant. It's just hit the Americans.
Yeah.
And the New York Times have called it the best doctor show ever.
Okay.
Ever.
So there you go.
And
Watch Transplant.
And it's based in Toronto.
Yeah.
When we did Night Heat, it was in this nameless American city.
Right. I think you're seeing that a lot more. So,
Yeah.
Forever Terry, as we get you out of here, there's a brand new book out called Forever Terry that is fabulous. It's got so many people involved in it. How did Forever Terry come about?
It was actually a friend of Daryl Fox is Terry's brother, who had the idea, and it was to get people who had knew Terry or who had met Terry or somehow he had affected them. And so they started getting people to go to do it, and then they were well into it, and I think they needed 40 people, and I think they were up to 30, and Daryl called me out of the blue and said, can you help us get some people? So because I had done this before for the foundation, so I was able to get them. They already had Bobby Orr, Margaret Atwood, Daryl Sittler, but I was able to get him Wayne Gretzky, Silken Lauman. I got Michael Bublé to write the foreword.
So many people that
Steve Nash,
Sean Ashmore, who played him in the movie, to name a few. Jim Terrian Jr. We've got Bret Hart, Haley Wickenheiser, Rick Hansen, of course.
Yeah.
Jay Triano, Lloyd Robertson. Like, there's some Steve Nash. There's some Canadian royalty on this list.
Douglas Copeland.
Yeah.
Two great authors.
Yeah.
And Leslie Scrivener. Each entry is about 800 words long, and before the book came out last Wednesday, I had actually only read Bobby Orr's and Silken's submissions, so when I picked up the book, I was able to, and it's like you say, it's amazing to read it. Very emotional. So many stories from the heart. A couple of the best ones are people who are alive today. There's a gentleman by the name of Darren Park, serious brain cancer, that normally people don't survive. He's alive because of the research that Terry had funded. So there's stories about how people with cancer are alive today, and then there's other people who dealt with them. Gretzky, for instance, a neat story in there. They were out here playing, and when Terry was still alive, they call the house, ask Mom, can we come and visit him? Him and Mark Messier jump in a taxi cab and drive out and spend the afternoon with Terry, and he's very sick, and so most of the day they're with him in his bedroom while he's in bed.
Yeah.
And then to find out that Sidney Crosby has Terry's picture in his front hallway, so he sees this every day.
Yeah. It's truly remarkable what he's been able to do. The legacy lives on, and I, as I said, I couldn't be happier that he's from here and somebody that we can call our own, and has done such amazing things for people of the world. So, Forever Terry, you can pick up everywhere, all your bookstores. I recommend picking up an actual copy. I mean, obviously people are doing digital books and stuff like now, but this is a book to be.
The profits are going, by the way, are going to the foundation.
All the way to the foundation. Yeah. There's some great people in here, some great stories. Bill, I can't thank you enough for the time today to tell this story.
Thank you for bringing the story to your listeners.
I can't wait to get this episode out. It's part of this brand new life cast that I've put together, talking about the life. I'm going to finish with a question, and I'm finishing with everybody. And what is the life of Bill Viggers like now?
The life is something that even 25 years ago, I would not believe how fortunate I am to be living. I'm happily married to a wonderful woman who puts up with me and keeps me in line. And I don't think there's a better thing that could be said. I've got 3 wonderful kids, Jordan, Carrie Ann, and Patrick. Life is pretty good, and I'm still able to tell Terry's story 40 years later. Never thought I'd be here, let alone tell the stories.
Sure.
But to be able to carry stories on, and my effort in telling Terry's story is to make him alive and to make him real, and that he's not a statue, that he's a real person who did a real thing, and that he was just a regular kid.
Well, he lives on forever, through these stories. Never stop telling them, Bill. I know it can be probably, some people would get annoyed by having to tell the same thing over and over again. I appreciate you giving me all of this time, and the listeners, the Cancer Society, anyone who's going to listen to this that's going to learn a little bit more about Terry out of this. That's the plan. Help push it forward. Help spread Terry's message to everybody. Never stop telling that story, Bill, because
Terry Fox Foundation or the Terry Fox Research Center. 2 different websites, 2 different, but the particular the research website. You can find out where, if you're giving money, you find out where the money is being spent. And if people don't know, the Terry Fox Foundation, 79 cents of every single dollar goes to research. And it's probably the most frugal charitable foundation out there. I think the only other ones, I think the Salvation Army does a little bit better.
Sure.
But I think the Terry Fox Foundation is up there like 2nd or 3rd.
And you're recommending the Steve Nash documentary?
Steve Nash documentary. It's called Into the Wind. It was done for TSN, a series called 2020.
Yeah.
That actually Spike Lee funded.
Awesome.
And final funny story, Steve comes over to their house, interviews me for like 3 hours. My son Jordan, who was 18 at the time, he's also not a big sports guy, doesn't get out of bed. Finally, Steve Nash goes down to his bedroom and wakes him up. Tells him to get his ass out of bed. It's 11 o'clock.
Steve Nash was here?
Yeah.
What? Yeah, hilarious.
Bill, who woke you up this morning? Steve Nash.
I can't. I look forward to doing this again one day. We'll tell more stories down the road. Thank you so much for appearing on the Lifecast. This series is very special to me. I want to have some great stories on it, and I don't think there's a better story to tell in the world than what Terry did. To have you be a part of that legacy is truly amazing, and you should be very proud and happy of what you've done. And if you guys want to see some old Night Heat clips, look on YouTube and watch Bill grabbing some people's ass in the jail. So,
or the opening of, I forget, it's episode 86 where I'm playing the wino. I'm going to tell one last funny story.
Oh, sure. Well, let's cheers to that with a partake.
Okay, cheers to that because it's not a Terry story. Here.
Cheers, buddy.
I'm a wino and I'm laying in a pile of garbage and I'm supposed to be covered with cats. And the cats won't stay in place, so I do the animal trainer. Yeah. I said, give me the cat food. And he handed me a can of the cat food, and I took it, and I absolutely covered myself, my face, my clothes, everything. And, of course, okay, roll them, and I've got like 10 cats sitting on top of me, like eating off my face and stuff.
We can find that on YouTube, yeah?
And I played such a good drunk. The co-star, Jeff Wincott, was really angry at me because he thought I was really drunk.
Well, I mean, that's called method.
Yes, method
right?
acting, yes.
Today's episode brought to you by Partake non-alcoholic beer. These guys have been amazing. They've sponsored a podcast, an incredible company offering 5 different kinds for whatever you're looking for. Bill's got a blonde right now. He's got the Partake good. Blonde. I just finished the Pale on the beach because that's what you do. We're both driving down the road after this, so this is the perfect way to kind of do that.
Never ever drink and drive.
Never ever drink and drive. Never ever drink and drive. Never do it. And then I thank you all for listening this week. I hope you'll spread the word on this message and this episode to everyone that you can. Also available on the DeanBlundell.com network, BrentonOnTour.com, and everywhere you get your pods. So thanks again, Bill. We'll talk soon.